I would like to call to order the Oregon City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for February 3rd of 2025. The time is 7:02 PM. Would you please join us in standing and saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ready? Right. Thank you. This is a committee of the whole meeting and attendance is not required. However, please note that all council members are present. Also joining us this evening is Mayor Michael J. Safarian, City Administrator Joel Major, our Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, our Law Director Melissa Papora, Public Service Director Paul Roman, our Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, and our Finance Director Nick Roman. And I see our Director of Streets is out in the audience as well, Keith Henninger. Up next is the first order of business is persons on delegation. We do have someone that is signed in, so Omar Schmidi, if you would please come up and give your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. Omar Smady, 2949 Camelot Drive. So I'm here today because I had a couple things for Mr. Roman and Mr. Mazer. Well, first, I just want to thank the city and all the employees for everything they do. Really, it's amazing. I noticed a lot of things. Unfortunately, I had an issue last week that I mentioned to OPD about the Navarre and Wheeling intersection where I was on the turning lanes driving south on Wheeling. And I feel like those two, there's the two turning lanes. They could be marked a lot better. They're not very visible like the path of the travel. And I feel like it could be a lot better because I almost was hit. And I had to swerve out of the way. Had another car been in the other lane, I would have been at fault. And I just felt like maybe that was just one thing that I thought could have been helpful to prevent that maybe. So I just thought I'd mention that. And I saw it also at that corner on Friday, there was some work. I noticed a lot of the lights are teardrop LED lights, but yet that one pole is different. Was that what they were working on? Was that pole? It's a street light, but there's an LED light that's different. It's not a teardrop light on that corner right with St. Charles's that I'm referring to. Navarre and Wheeling, right there on the hospital side. That light is the only one that's different than every other one in the whole city. All the other ones are like that teardrop LED. They were doing work, and I wonder if they replaced that light there.
Henninger's in the audience. So there are streetlights that the city owns and operates along Navarre on the south side, which are taller, straight. I don't think they're aluminum poles. And then there's the decorative poles that came in with a lot of our improvements, putting in the the U-turn and the medians, which are the teardrop decorative. So I'm thinking it's a taller, straight.
Yes, it's taller.
Okay. But so what was the question about it? Is just that it's not working?
Was that what they were replacing that one on Friday?
Well, Keith is saying no, it would be us. Oh, the work. So you're wondering about the work in the pavement. That's Columbia Gas, and they have a leak in their gas line, and they did a road closure for that, and they're still working on that.
Okay, so it wasn't that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that was the only thing I wanted to ask you about was that, if we could get better markings.
Yeah.
To
Look at it.
Would be helpful. I was curious also, since you mentioned Mr. Henninger, is there a replacement like from within? Or are you looking out to promote from within or
What are you
replace
asking?
him?
I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
My understanding was he was retiring.
Mr.
No.
President, so that was from the part-time fire department that he was.
Oh. Well, that's why I'm
resigning,
confused. I'm
retiring.
sorry.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
It's a different Henninger and
No, that's correct. He also worked in the part-time fire department.
what was
And
his first name?
Keith.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, I was actually,
yeah, I know more.
I was nervous last week when when I was getting talked about, because it did sound like he was retiring from streets, and I'm like, no, he's not leaving
Yeah,
our street
that's why I'm
department.
totally baffled right now. Thank you for clarifying
Yeah,
that.
no problem.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Roman. So for Mr. Mazer, there was a couple things I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, I appreciate the Facebook updates from the city. There was things that mentioned, and there was one about the Senate Bill 56 that I wanted to ask about, because on your post, it says current version changes the revenue distribution from the excise tax, and that no longer include municipalities that have dispensaries. And I looked at that bill and I'm kind of wondering, like, does that mean that we would not receive the excise tax? Because it would go towards, from what I saw, there was some, it would basically go to the state treasury, a marijuana receipts fund is what I saw on the bill. So would they collect the excise taxes? And that's the
Mr.
issue?
President,
Mr. Major.
and Mr. Smitty, yes, that would mean that when it says that municipalities are excluded in the new bill, that means that, yes, all the sales tax, the excise tax would go to the state, and the cities would not collect any of it.
And my understanding is that they're increasing it from 10 to 15% as well.
Yeah,
So
so
what's,
they carved out the municipalities out of it and are solely gonna be collecting all of it for the state, yeah. I mean, that's a proposal, that's in the bill right now, and that's what's being discussed and reviewed, so if that's,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was what I understood, is that it's okay. And then there was another one, I wanted to ask you, because I was looking, I'm one of the ones contesting my property taxes. And while I was looking at my market area, I noticed that there's another market area in Oregon that has Toledo and Oregon residences in two different zip codes. I think it was 1501R. And I thought, well, gee, what defines a market area if it's not by city or zip code? Would you be able to answer that?
no, I'm not sure what you're talking about. If it has to do with the evaluations in the auditor's office,
No, just the market area specifically. They carved up the whole city into market areas, they call them.
I went through a process of peeling my own and going through the market areas. I don't know how they carve out the it's all, I mean, I don't know if it has to be within a certain distance of each other. I'm in Hallschild, Ardmore is marked, is that market. And I think they do a couple neighborhoods at a time, and it could be a mix of, I bet it could be a mix of Toledo and Oregon, like Van Buren, a lot of places along the border of Toledo, I could see them mixing it up. And if it's all in the county, only the county could answer that, to be honest. I mean, that's the only way to do that.
Yeah, also, while I got you, I wanted to mention, like, is there like any online feedback form for citizens or residents of Oregon to submit? Like, maybe concerns to make it easier for them? I mean, for me, I know who to contact, but like maybe others. I'm just thinking about that Facebook post that you guys do. Like if you could provide somewhere where people could make it easy for people to submit feedback.
Yeah, I think, and then I don't know, Cassie, on our website, I think we do get feedback all the, I know the engineers get emails all the time, and I think that's through our website, correct? I'm sorry, Mr. President, I should be going through you. I apologize.
No, you're fine. Ms. Rawson?
Yes, Mr. President and Mr. Roman, there are links to directly email into us, but we can always make it easily, on the top of our website or something like that, to add a link that just says, message us or something. We can make that change on our website if that would make it easier.
Yeah.
I think it would be ideal and better for citizens like who are interested in, bringing up concerns. It might be worth something looking at. And while I'm on that, I really appreciate everything the city has done. I mean, anytime I've ever needed anything, whether it be streets, water, tax department, I've worked, I've reported stuff to Keith, OPD. I mean, you guys are all great. I really appreciate everything. It's a pleasure living here. That is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our first item, we're going to go through our agenda here. We have, the first 7 items are being presented tonight by, Mayor Safarian and Fire Chief, Clayton O'Brien. So, the first item on the agenda for discussion is, 012 of 2025. Chief O'Brien, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance here is for Atlantic Emergency that does take care of our fire apparatus. It's an annual ordinance that we do every single year. They are ones that work on our apparatus when it comes to the specialized things. Most of the time, we do use our local, as you'll see in the next ordinance, through American Enterprise, but on the times when they can't do it, this is where these trucks, the big trucks, have to go.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Council. No questions? Okay, hearing none, I will seek a motion to, move item number 012 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paulo.
so moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Paulo. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Mrs. Paula, second by Mr. Salander to move item 012 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 012 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 013 of 2025 being presented by the mayor and Chief O'Brien. Chief O'Brien, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, this is another annual ordinance that we do, and this one is for American Enterprise. American Enterprise does take care of our apparatus and do PM maintenances, inspections and testings, but also they do acute fixes as well when we do have the apparatus problems. Again, this was also budgeted out of our automotive maintenance account.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 013 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Paula. Second? Second. Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander to move item 013 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 013 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 014 of 2025, and we'll go right to Chief O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is for Zoll Medical, which is the manufacturer of our ventilators. So we do own 3 ventilators that are on our ambulances. We did purchase those ventilators last year, and due to the fact that they had a 1-year manufacturer warranty, we did not have to enter into a contract for the PM and the maintenance of those ventilators at that time. So that 1 year is now up, and this is our 4-year contract for the PM maintenance and calibration of those ventilators. So we did budget for that out of our budget as well.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 014 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you. Second. Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander to move item 014 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 014 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item up on tonight's for discussion is item 015 of 2025, and we'll go right to Chief O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, this will stick with our annual ordinances when it comes to maintenance and care of our apparatus. We did budget for this, but this is for WW Williams, also a fairly local company that we use in the event that we can't get the apparatus fixed at any of the other locations.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 015 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander to move item 015 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 015 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. Our next item up on, for discussion tonight is item 016 of 2025. And we'll go right to Chief O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance deals with the purchase of 2 support vehicles. And we did budget for that in our 2025 apparatus plan. Assistant Chief Mark Mullins did run this project, and I'll let him talk on this.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. President, Council, these 2 vehicles will be replacing 2 additional vehicles that we currently have, a 2015 Tahoe with 87,000 miles, it's 10 years old, and a 2010 Tahoe that's 130,000 miles with 15 years old. These vehicles will come out of Lally Chevrolet. They are the only state bid dealership that it is in the state of Ohio in Warrensville Heights. That is just east of Cleveland. In doing so, we saved about $6,000 overall for this project, because if you were to go outside of the bid and get these, it's quite expensive. So we did save quite a bit of money on these. Any questions, I'd be happy to ask or answer, excuse me.
Thank you, Chiefs.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. These are going to be put in operation and replace existings. The only question I have is, all of our vehicles are red, and this indicates that we're buying black.
That is correct.
Okay.
So we're changing the color scheme to match the new medic units and the current medic unit that was sent out to be painted, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck. Council, any other questions or concerns? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 016 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander to move item 016 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 016 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item up for discussion is 017 of 2025, and we'll go right to Chief O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, this is the ordinance for the purchase of a boat. We did plan for this in the budget in the 2025 apparatus replacement plan. We did bring Battalion Chief Joe Pertee, who did lead that project in the committee as they did the specs for that. So if there is any questions on the purchase of the boat or any specifics, then we can certainly answer those.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions or concerns?
Mr. President.
Mr. Horniak.
Chief, just a quick question on this. I remember we had talked about this some time back, about a boat in here, and I thought I remember that there was some potential for a grant or some financial support in acquiring a boat. Is that still in play, or have we not been able to secure that?
Mr. President, Mr. Horniak, that is actually not in play. We did apply for the port security grant. We did get word back that we were not successful in that. After that bridge got taken out, that's where a lot of the funding got. There was only one award in our 9th district.
Very good. Thank
Yeah.
you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Council, hearing no more additional questions, I will seek a motion to move item 17 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Mrs. Paula, second by Mr. Salander to move item 17 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, any objections? Hearing none, item 17 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 18 of 2025, and we'll go right to Chief O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this ordinance is the creation of the lieutenant position at the fire department. One of our goals for 2025 was to create the lieutenant position. This ordinance allows us to move forward with the Civil Service Commission and working towards the testing procedures. We did work all the details out as for the lieutenant position with the union during union negotiations in 2024. But this is for the creation of that position. Now, just to further explain that, by creating the lieutenant position doesn't create new positions that we'll be hiring. So it's not like bringing in 3 new people. What this will do is internal individuals that will be promoted from firefighter to lieutenant. We have been working towards this for some time. We did provide an officer boot camp back in December, and we've hosted a few other classes in preparing the individuals to make the next step to the lieutenant position. The goal is to promote 3 individuals this year in 2025. That'll provide us a lieutenant at Station 1 per shift. And then in 2026, we will promote 3 more lieutenants, and that'll be a lieutenant on each shift at Station number 2.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions or concerns?
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. How much more money are these people gonna get? We continue to add money to our fire budget, and it just seems like it's adding up every time we talk about positions.
Mr. President and Mr. Wallensack, as far as the money goes for the lieutenant and the promotion would be that it's paid at 10% above their current pay when they get promoted. So whatever step they are in, that would be 10% above. Why it brings a value is not only to the span of control within the department, but also hour for hour, our battalion chiefs receive overtime in the amounts of when they're off. So if a battalion chief is off, another battalion chief works and gets time and a half for that pay. In the future, when the lieutenants are in this position, we will then be able to have, and what we created was the acting pay. So instead of paying time and a half for that 24 hours at a battalion chief rate in the future, it'll be a lieutenant that would move up to that battalion chief role and be paid that acting role pay, which would be a percentage of that 10%, or would be a 10% increase in that current pay.
Would they receive the pay of that position for the hours that they're working? In that temporary role, they get paid the same as the battalion chief?
In that temporary role. Nick,
Okay.
did you have something to add? Okay, yeah, in that temporary role for the 24 hours. So you're saving the halftime, we're not paying the overtime. The battalion chiefs have what they call a Kelly day every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks when they have their day off, then either another battalion chief is covering that time or that battalion chief is working that said time. That is paid at time and a half. In the future, that lieutenant that's assigned to that shift would move up to be that role. So that not only does save us on the time and a half, but it also helps with the span of control and the succession planning of the department as, future growth and promotions down the road to prepare the individuals for those next roles.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck. Council, any further questions or concerns?
Mr.
Comments?
President,
Mr. Drake.
Chief O'Brien, just for clarification, so with creating this, you'll hire from within somebody else? You said another fire personnel. So nobody will lose their job, I guess. That's what I'm asking.
Mr. President, Mr. Drake, that is correct. So these positions is just essentially a classification. So the lieutenant position being that creates a classification. Current firefighters within our organization there will be 3 in 2025 and 3 in 2026 that would go from firefighter to lieutenant.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
Mr. President,
Mr. Salander.
thank you. Chief, I just want to make sure I'm understanding on what you were talking about there with Mr. Wallensack too. So my understanding that they would be paid at like what they're at right now, for example, and they were only paid that extra 10% during those times that they're in that role. Am I getting that correct?
Mr. President, Mr. Salander, that is correct.
Okay.
Only during that time. So when they're in
Okay.
the acting role, they would be paid an acting pay. Now,
Okay.
with that being said, that also creates, so the lieutenant moves up to the battalion chief role, gets paid that acting pay. The firefighter, there would be a firefighter that moves up into an acting role as a lieutenant. So that goes along with that succession planning of what we're doing at the fire department.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep, you're welcome.
Mr. President,
Thank you, Mr. Salander.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
For clarification, lieutenants get a 10% bump in their everyday pay. Then they get more if they go up to the battalion chief.
Okay, thank you. That was what I missed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That is correct.
Council, any questions? Ms. Chief O'Brien, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I just wanted to, I do apologize, but that is correct. So the six individuals in the end, or the three immediates, they would be getting 10% above whatever that firefighter step pay that they're in right now. And that would happen all the time because they would always be in the lieutenant role. If they move up to the battalion chief roles, when they get the acting pay, and vice versa for a firefighter.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Sandlander. Council, anything further? Any questions or concerns? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 18 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paul.
so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by Mr. Sandlander. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Sandlander to move item 018 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Item 18 is moved to next week's agenda, or 018. Our next four items are going to be presented by the mayor and Paul Roman. So the next item on the agenda is for discussion is item 019 of 2025. Bring Mr. Mayor, or go right to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mayor. This ordinance is needed for the purchase of a mini excavator and trailer for the Water Distribution Department. City received 3 quotes, and the quote for the Yanmar excavator is the lowest best quote. The quote is also lower than the federal purchase contract, and Buck and Nobby is also the sole provider of the Yanmar. This purchase was included in the 25 CIP budget. The trailer also that comes with it is also through the federal purchase contract. So again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or concerns? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 019 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Sandlander.
so moved.
Thank you.
Second,
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Sandlander, second by Ms. Pauloff to move item 19 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none. Item 19 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. Our next item on the agenda for discussion is item 020 of 2025, being presented by the mayor and Mr. Roman. Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is for the purchase of a pickup truck for the street department. 3 quotes were received for a half-ton super crew cab pickup truck. And the quote from Ballman Ford was the lowest best quote out of the 3. Again, the purchase was included in the 2025 CIP plan. And I just want to note that the old vehicle will go to the engineering department, and as noted in the budget. And we do have 2 older 2015 Colorado SUVs that would likely go on Gov Deals and help pay for this as well. So that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
so move to next week, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I didn't get that far into the thing, but yeah, we have a motion by Mr. Drake for Ms. Pauloff. Thank you. So we have a motion by Mr. Drake and a second by Ms. Pauloff to move item 020 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 20 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 021 of 2025, and we'll go right to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could, I'll just present the next 2 items together, 21 and 22.
Thank you.
Okay, well, both items make up what's really our snow plow, but the item 21 is for the purchase of the cab and chassis, again, which is used for the street department, it's used for general maintenance and plowing snow. The quote from Fremont White Truck is the lowest best quote compared to the federal purchase contract with Western Star. The descriptions are included in Exhibit A. Again, the purchase was included through the 2025 budget. Item 22 is for the dump body, the salt spreader, and the plow. If council approves, obviously the cab and chassis, then with the dump body, salt spreader, and plow that would be installed after we receive that. There is a 6 to 8 month window to receive the cab and chassis. So, and then even then, you still need a month or two for them to install the dump body. And, but the dump body and salt spreader is through the actual state purchase contract through Kaleida Trucks. And that is the bid through the federal purchase program. So again, happy to answer any questions on either item.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 021 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
It replaces 2003.
Oh, and we might, yeah, we can do them both at the same time. And are there any questions over item 22 of 2025? Hearing none, we'll seek a motion to move them both to next week's agenda. Let's go with item 021 first.
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff,
so moved.
thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Can we have a motion by, for item 022 of 2025?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Pauloff,
so moved.
thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Both are, both were motioned by Ms. Pauloff and second by Mr. Salander. Counselor, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 021 of 2025 and item 022 of 2025 are moved to next week's agenda. Our next item up, or the next two items are being presented by the mayor and city administrator Joe Mazur. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 23 of 2025. We'll go right to Mr. Mazur.
Thank you, Mr. President and council. This item would, is an ordinance to change the job description of the administrative clerk position. What we did is if you go back to the third to last page of your packets, you'll see highlighted the portion that we removed. Basically, we removed the typing test from the administrative clerk position. So it's kind of a cleanup item and that was it. So happy to answer any questions.
Mr. President,
Thank you, Mr. Mazur.
are we
Mr.
not
Wallen.
requiring them to type anymore?
We're not requiring them
To
to
type
pass
fast.
the typing test. 45 words per minute. Yes.
That's easy. Yeah, the hunt and peck method, I can do that. Yeah. Thank you. Council, any other further questions or comments? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 23 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paul, second by Mr. Salander to move item 2023 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. And our last item up tonight is item 24 of 2025 being presented by the mayor and Mr. Mazur. We'll go right to Mr. Mazur.
Thank you, Mr. President and council. So this ordinance would authorize us to enter into the annual agreement with the OEDF. I would like to just point out, if you go to the last pages, the last two pages, you'll see in the Exhibit A is the agreement. And I want to call out the last four letters in Section 1, F, G, H, and I. Those were the items that were changed from the previous year's agreement. And this was just in collaboration between all of us, Mary included, interim OEDF director, who's with us today out in the audience, and staff here. We all reviewed this, had all of our different tweaks and changes to it that we thought would be, that would work out best for us to better provide clarification on what the funds are being used for. So, but just to kind of go through them. We have the land account that would, we would need a transaction report from that every year, which we did get for 2024. And that's prepared by the director. And at any point during the year, the administrator and finance director could request an update of it. So we do have that in there. And in that, any confidential information would be redacted at the request of any businesses, and that the OEDF would like to keep the anonymity of those individuals. And then G is that that G is where we can request at any time, the land account transactions. They'll provide a 990 for the city of the prior year. So then in this case, it would be 2023. And that was changed due to the comments that Mary had mentioned before about when they get their tax returns done and all their financial statements done. Usually doesn't happen until later in the year. And as I mentioned before, when I first drafted this the prior year, it was explained to me that by the director and the president, that they could do that when in fact I don't think they would have been able to do it. So we corrected it here, and then in the end, provide an operations budget. I will point out that an operational budget was not provided in 2024. We did withhold payment. During that whole time, we did take a look at all of the books, so to speak. We got the financial reports in, the transaction report for the land account. So at that point, in my opinion, getting a budget for 2024 when the year's already over seems like a moot point. So rather than, wag our finger at the OEDF and have them produce that, that's why I stated also why I was okay with approving of the invoice once we receive it. So, but in 2025, we do have their budget drafted here. That's the next page. It's the OEDF 2025 operation budget. So that's there for everybody to take a look at. And with that, I'll leave it at that and ask any questions if you have them. And I don't know if Mary, if you want to come up and answer any of them, if anybody has questions.
Thank you,
That
Mr.
works.
Major. Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Horniak.
Just a couple points of clarity in looking through this. I mean, most of this looks fairly similar with a couple of tweaks to last year's agreement. In item H, we're calling for the 990 prepared by a CPA firm detailing financial activities of 2023. I thought we had received 23. It was 24 waiting through the discussion last week of it's later in the year than earlier. Have we received 23 or not?
Yes, Mary.
Sure.
Mary Gregory, 19190 West Orchard Drive, Elmore, Ohio.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm also with the Oregon Economic Development Foundation, which is why I'm here today. So basically, this lags a year, and I think that's where all the confusion was. So yeah, we provided, in order to get paid for 2024, you guys are very tough, I guess, customers, and as you should be. So yeah, we finally were able to get you the 2023 990 and the financials, plus in advance, or I'm sorry, plus as of January 30th, I provided you with the 2025 budget. And this is so we could get paid for the year 2024. So basically, every year we're a year behind. Now, and so that's why you have two invoices actually today. Now you also have the invoice for 2025, which we will start asking for, 25,000 a quarter like we did in the past. But again, you're not going to see the financials for 2025 until, I'm sorry,
24.
2024 until Q3 or Q4 when our nonprofit attorney, or when our attorney, our CPA starts doing our nonprofit activity
Okay.
financials.
So with that being the case, in item H, aren't we looking for 2024s as part of the 25 agreement?
Yeah, so actually I created a second agreement for 2026. Sounds confusing, but so in 2020, I don't know if you have that one, if you want to flip to it or, oh, sorry. Okay, so 2024, you're not going to get until the end of 2025. And then that's when we hope to appeal to you to get paid for 2026, because again, we lag a year because our financials don't come or aren't done until the end of the year.
Okay, so in the agreement for 2026, is that when we're noting through this item H to designate the reports for 2024?
Sorry, can you repeat that? There was-
Sure. So in item H, since this is the 25 agreement and it's referencing the financial activities of 2023, does that mean that the agreement for 2026 would reference the financials for 2024?
Correct.
So in fact, we're working 2 years in arrears on financial reporting. And if it comes later in the year, should that not be into, so in 25, should we not be looking for the 24s? And I'm just going back, Ms. Gregory, to last week's discussion of the length of time, Terry, it's typically third quarter-ish when this data may be collected and finalized. So realistically, in 25, shouldn't we be looking for 24? And in 26, we should be looking for 25.
That's correct. So in 2024, we just got you the 2023 financials. And so we're just letting you know that for this period of 2024, we've met all of our requirements, a budget, the 990, the financials, so that we could get paid for 2024.
Okay, so even though the agreement is dated today in 2025, it's actually reverting back to 2024.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, easy enough.
It
And the
even
one
was
we
hard
will
for me
see
to
in
wrap
the
my brain around.
future is 2026, which in essence is enumerating for 2025. Okay,
If I
let's
may,
vote. I
Mr.
think I'm
Mr.
catching up
President.
now.
Mr. Major.
Mr. President, Mr. Horniak, I think that, if we do that, then what Mary is explaining is that they don't get this, they won't have the 2025 report done until the latter part of 2026.
That's right.
So
That's right.
that's why that's.
We'll close our books on December 2025.
Yep.
And then we have an extension until May, then we have the extension until March or October, and then we're able to provide you with the 2025 in 2026. I know,
Mr. President,
Crazy.
if I could,
Mis-
or Mr.
Mr. Roman.
Horniak. So the reason why it's stated that way in here is because it's saying we have received them. That's where we ran into an issue in the past, is that when we're passing this ordinance or this agreement, it was saying that we had the financial statements in hand. So like last year when we passed it, it said that we had the 23 and 22 financial statements. We didn't have them because they weren't going to be prepared for another 6 months. And that was kind of an oversight on us that we should have realized that in talking with the president and director at that time. So that's where, if we were to say that we have the 990 prepared for 2024 at the passing of this agreement, we would fall into what we did last year, where they're not actually following the agreement because we don't have it yet. We will expect to get the 24 990 by the end of the year. We don't want to make that a stipulation in the agreement to make a payment because we're not going to receive it until later in the year, until 3/4 of the payments have already been made. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. Thank you. Mr. President, I have one other question. if I may.
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
All right. So based on the conversation, again, just going back to last week and talking through the financial reporting timeline that we have with the OEDF, in the items where we're calling out in item I have no problem. I think having a budget by the end of January for the year is appropriate. Going into the area of F, where we're also using that January 30th, which is a land account transaction report. I'm assuming there was dialogue back and forth of, is that January 30 a proper date? I'm just asking, is that expected to be done by that time frame so that we don't get that carryover and we wind up back into the same position?
Yeah, Mr. President, if I could answer to that as well. Yeah, so they will be able to have that because this transaction report is going to be strictly based off the actual bank activity. So at the end, at 12/31/25, 12/31/24, they had all of the transactions that were done in 24, like they can just look at their bank account, create the transaction report, make it so they take out any pertinent, confidential information, provide us with that transaction report. And so we'll have that list like that we received this year. We will go, or I or the administrator will go and review it against the actual bank statements to say, yes, this matches every transaction that came out of the land account. So yes, they should have that really by 12/31.
So basically what we did just towards the end of this year is we sat down, like Nick said, and then I just built this form based on all the things that the team requested from us in order to get paid. And then I did the same thing for next year's contract.
Mr. President, I'm sorry,
Mr. Horniak.
I thought of one more. And Ms. Gregory, thank you for your time and for your answers with this. So you're acting in the director's role currently,
Yes.
in an interim role, if you will? or-
Interim only, I'm actually a consultant. I actually make less money here doing this. Every minute I'm doing this, I'm losing money, basically. But, so the reason I built this is so that the next person comes through, knows exactly what they have to submit and when. So Nick, Mike and Joel know exactly when it's gonna be arriving. And if it doesn't arrive, then they will say, well, we're not paying you, just like they did last year. So.
And the expectation is that that position will be posted for hire sometime in the early parts of 2025?
We're actually interviewing.
Okay.
We just started. Some very good candidates are out there,
Very good.
surprisingly.
Very good. And the last thing I have is, again, just a thanks. I think last week was enlightening and helpful for a lot of folks, with a lot of the different business leaders within our community to come forward and talk about things that have been done, things that have been accomplished, things that are worked. Sometimes the confidential nature, non-disclosures of people who want to come in and inquire and I'll say kick the tires, but don't necessarily want to tell the world they're
That's right.
looking in this area.
Mhm.
So I do appreciate all the work and the value that the OED effort does bring to us. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory.
Mr. President?
Ms.
Oh, was somebody ahead of
Ackerman.
me? Go. I can wait if somebody was ahead of me.
No,
Oh, okay.
you're fine.
Ms. Gregory, is it possible, since we have three people, that could we have Mr. Horniak be a part of that hiring process, considering like we have the three, with Mr. Major, Mr. Safarian, and Mr. Horniak are on, they represent us to the OEDF. Is that out of the question for Mr. Horniak to, and I don't know if his time allows, maybe Mr. Major, whoever, that they have some input into the hiring of the director?
As a courtesy, we could probably invite, but I feel that between Joel and Mike, you guys are well represented because they, and Nick, I mean, they deal with what the director would have to do every day. I mean, as a director, we're working with Joel, Mike, and Melissa every day. So they know what it takes to be a good director, especially going through this period right now. I can do that as a courtesy, but I don't know if Mr. Horniak has a time, and I know we're not going to slow down the process. It's very hard to get 4 business executives together in one room, let alone adding another one, plus me, plus the candidates.
Thank you. Just consideration, but I was wondering too, in 2022, the agreement that the city had with the OEDF, and it was very similar to what you're looking at now, but it said, was only 80,000 in 2022. But one of the stipulations in number 3 was the foundation has provided the city with a 2021 transaction report prepared by a CPA firm of its financial activities, which is on file. The foundation, number 4, the foundation agrees to provide the city with the 2022 compilation report prepared by a CPA firm of its financial activities on a timely basis. So it seems like that window was more possible to occur, that turnover of information. So are we changing it because that just, I mean, when you say that it's on file, that means they had already received a 21 transaction report by, I believe it's March. But anyway, I was just wondering why it's taking longer to, is it just that they proved that it was not possible to get it?
We're
Maybe
actually
Nick- maybe
doing
Nick
it,
knows
we're sending
this.
it to you earlier. So we're going to have the transaction report at the top of the year. So that's why I wrote this agreement that way. I tweaked it a bit so that we could give you information at the top of the year. It's not going to be the CPA prepared but compilation nor the 990, but our CPA does provide us with transaction reports. I provide us with transaction reports because I pull them right off of our bank statements. And so that's what we will sit down with whomever and show, here's what came in, here's what went out. And so again, I guess I feel that we're going above and beyond by giving you this. And actually, since I know that I'm going to be leaving, I wanted to create something that everyone could know, this is the date when some XYZ is due, and this is the date when ABC is due, and so on and so forth. So actually, we're hitting it early.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
23 was the hiccup year.
I don't know if it was a hiccup so much. Again, so we had a director leave in May of 2024. And our filings were extended till October or November, whenever it was. And we hired, and then I was on board just interim. Then we hired somebody. The process did not work at that time for that person. So then I had to come back on board and do this mad scramble to get, like I said, last Monday, I had to stop and relearn how to do these processes and look through the books and set up the passwords and try to get back into QuickBooks to learn where the transactions were so that I could provide them to the team. I wouldn't say it was a hiccup. It was just transition, people coming in and going. Just as, I don't know if you have a business or if you've ever worked in a business, but if you just up and left and somebody had to come in and do your books, it would take them a little bit to figure out where you left off and where to start up again.
That's why you got to have that plan. Like I wouldn't have let Alec walk out the door until he
He did
Got it.
everything.
Or he
Everything
came-
was done. I do want to make sure everybody is aware of that. He did a very good job. Everything was done. But we extended our due dates for the benefit of actually our CPA, for the benefit of our CPA. Again, we're a nonprofit. We're low in the total board. We're very small. They don't make any money off of us. We're a hassle. They do it because they care about business and they're business savvy and they know we need an expert. Yeah, Alec did set us up perfectly. We extended it. And then in that interim period, when I left and the new person came on board, that's when things started to unravel a bit because that new person had so much to learn. So gosh darn much to learn. Plus some of the biggest, most transformative projects that I've ever possibly looked at Oregon were crossing his plate. I mean, they'd already started when Alec was here, but trying to juggle all that, I mean, that poor guy had a lot to juggle in a very short amount of time.
Okay, so Mr. Horniak, your experience with this is, do you think this timing is reasonable in the new agreement?
Mr. Ackerman, Mr. President, if I may.
Yes.
I do, and that's why I asked the questions I did, based on some of the conversation, what we've seen over the last couple of years with the transition that we've seen. And, transition creates delay because of the re-education process. So, that's why I asked, do we feel comfortable that the transaction report can be provided by the end of January in the following year? And if that's yes, I think that gives us a good enough look into, does this all line up, match up, and make sense? Waiting for the financials CPA prepared that would come later in the year, likely in the third quarter to early fourth quarter, based on timeline of the service provider they utilize, which does basically donate that time and service. I guarantee it's not his profit center for the year of preparing that. One thing I would share too, just Mr. Gregory, for your knowledge, is as long as I've served in this role with the OEDF as liaison or representative, each of the hires previous to the one, this past one, I usually got a phone call with hey, here's our 4 finalists. Here's the resumes, take a look. And then usually a phone call prior of, here's the finalists we think we want to move forward with. I do not sit in as part of that process because I understand as well busy schedules. Ms. Rawson would tell you every time she would call me saying, when are you free? I usually am telling her, are we talking April or May?
Okay.
So I do not want to slow that process down, nor do I need to be involved in that. But previously, for each time we hired, going back to the last 3, this most recent one was the only time I was not given that
Oh, okay.
information or a heads up. I didn't even know the individual's name until he had been hired almost a
Okay.
week, and I met him at the grand opening of the brewery.
Okay. So perhaps
So
a resume and a phone
previously,
call.
it had been shared. I would give light input if I felt it was necessary.
Okay.
I have hired tons of professionals and managers over my career. Also understand the role with this, but typically Tim would have shared those with me to say, here's who we're looking at. What are your thoughts or ideas with that? And in some of those cases, I know the people.
Okay.
So,
I understand now, so we'll
Yeah.
take care of that.
Yeah,
And
it's
Beth, I think you're
strictly-
gonna like the new process going forward, or not new, but the
It's very
process that
similar to
Joel
the-
and everybody established.
Thank,
Very
thank
and,
you.
and it's simply as a courtesy, as you mentioned. It is not a requirement. My input is weighted with nothing more than anything else. It just is given a courtesy ahead of time.
You got it.
Ms.
Thank you, Mr.
Ackerman, if you would, just for a second. Mr. Roman?
Yeah, Mr. President, I just want to speak a little bit to the 23 and 24 agreements because, I mean, I was brand new to a position where I had no experience dealing with OEDF. And so we had to come up with an agreement. We looked at what we had in the past. We believed that it was going to be good because I was brand new working in a 7-person department with only 3 people at the time. So it was very difficult. So over the last month and a half, 2 months, I've learned a ton about it, but over the last couple of years, I've learned more about the how our relationship works between us and OEDF. I do think this is a good way to do it. I think the main thing is seeing that transaction report and making sure that when transactions go through, it's being approved by the city administrator and mayor, and that council is at least has an understanding of what's going on. I think that's very important. That's what we've kind of learned over the last month and a half, is that we need to make sure that that information is out there. We obviously have to leave some stuff out for confidentiality, but getting that transaction report by the end of January is, in my opinion, the most important thing. So that's why we want to make sure we had that spelled out exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Thank you.
Ms. Ackerman?
Thank you. That answers a lot. And yeah, I just mainly based on how the OEDF was set up, it was that the council would have representation. And so that's why I just want to make sure, because this is administration, we're council, they're different entities, and I just want to make sure that we do have that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Council, any further discussions, questions, or comments?
Mr. President?
Mr. Horniak?
Just a question kind of going back and I'll say kind of in the blocking and tackling of execution on delivery of the information. The redaction that needs to be a part of this, and I think we all understand why with NDAs and everything else that comes into this. Who does the redaction? Because as soon as that's transmitted from you to anybody sitting over here, it is public fodder at that point in time. If that redaction is not completely done correctly, we could be sharing somebody's information that has specifically asked us not to. So who's in charge of the redaction piece?
Ms. Gregory, yes, thank you.
Okay, so that would be me or my replacement.
The director?
And so there's people actually in the community who said, I do not want my option agreements to be made public. So that was probably one of the key, most frightening things for me. That's probably why I moved a little bit slowly in releasing information. And then we do have some professional fees. Again, very important. These are very competitive companies. They do not want their proprietary pricing to be visible
Correct.
by their competitors. So I would be doing the redacting, and then I'm sure Joel or Mike or Nick would probably run me through paces to get the answers they needed. But I don't know. I think we did it right this time. I mean, I think we got what you needed, but yet everybody's protected.
Okay, that was my only question of who
Okay.
owns that task, because that can be very sensitive.
Okay.
And again, once you send any of that information, it becomes public
Yes.
information. And if we don't have that completely redacted the way it needs to be, that could be sensitive material that is all of a sudden now public domain.
Yep.
So that's my inquiry to that, not to question the abilities of that, just to make sure that that is something that is, I'll say, very carefully looked at and reviewed before it's sent over so that we make sure it does not become public domain by accident.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr.
Thank-
President?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory, and thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Horniak.
President, Mr. Horniak, just to set your mind at ease, it couldn't be more cryptic or vague if it had to be.
Thank you, Ms.
So if that
Ackerman.
gives you, put your mind at ease.
Council, are there any other questions or comments?
Mr. President?
Mr. Sandler?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking of that transaction report there too, just one question on that. I know we have to keep, as we've been talking about, the redacting of the confidential information, but is there, would there be anything a little more, at least a little more detailed than this? Just for example, I understand like you're saying about the professional fees of who and so forth, but I mean, for example, I'm like these line items for professional fees, is that to one entity? Okay. Okay, okay. That was my only really other thing, is just a little more detailed, I guess, to kind of understand, because like you're saying, it's nice, but it's just extremely general. Just a point there. Two things though, I did want to bring up and ask, about with the agreement. I know, Joel, we had discussed, last year, after we had an incident where a director aggressively approached the council table and was pulled back by other people while on video. Looking at perhaps having some sort of clause in there about behavior on that. Is that been considered, or is we're not doing it since that particular director is not here, or we never know what's going to happen in the future?
Mr. President, Mr. Slander, we did talk about that. I don't know if I hear a buzzing sound from the mic, so. Okay. We did talk about that, and I know which incident you're talking about. We didn't add it into this agreement as that is an OEDF employee. If that's something that we want to consider, I think that's worthy of more discussion. If that's something that, if everybody around this table wants to, everybody nod their head, we could add something in. That's, something we have to talk about, if everyone so chooses to. So,
Okay.
right now, this agreement is strictly for, the services that they provide.
Yeah.
That the OEDF provides. And
It's not the
what's
director.
required documentation there to provide, and then payment to them.
Yeah, okay.
It strictly reads like a contract,
Understandable.
not as a, like
Yep.
any disciplinary procedures or anything like that. So to
Right,
weave
this
that
isn't
into
about-
this,
Yeah,
it might be a separate discussion. I'm not really sure how to weave that
that makes
into this,
sense,
but
because this is more about what our agreement between the organization themselves and
Yeah.
us, not an individual. Does that
But
make-
I
am following that?
definitely hear what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
And I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would be incorporated into this.
Yeah, it may not be the specific document, because like you're saying, it's the entity itself. We're not making an agreement with an individual.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Mr.
And-
Sandler, if you would, if you may.
Yeah.
Mr. Horniak.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. I hate to interrupt your time with the floor, but just to also state in that is there also has to be a certain care component from the city's perspective of indicating conduct, discipline, those things. We do not want that person to have an essence of a de facto employee from the city, because their agreement for their professional conduct is with the foundation. If we impact what that agreement is, then they become a de facto employee of the city,
Follow.
not the foundation.
Gotcha.
But it's certainly something that can be brought to the foundation. I don't know if there is a professional conduct clause in there. Most professional contracts do have them.
Sure.
Certainly something we could share, but we as the city would have to be careful about requiring that as part of our agreement with them, because in essence, we
That makes
may be
sense, yeah.
adopting that employee at
Yeah,
that
that
time.
makes sense. I appreciate that
thank you,
explanation.
Mr.
Thank you,
That-
Mr.
That makes
Horniak.
sense. That does make sense.
Mr. Sandler, I know you had the floor.
Just
Nope,
one
no,
other-
you're, nope.
One other
Give it
quick
back.
point, or one other question, I guess. One other request, I guess, what that would be, would it be possible to get some sort of, whether it's on a quarterly basis or biannual or something like that, just having an update with us, going along, so that obviously you can't give, just like we talked about before, again, confidentiality and NDAs and all that jazz, but just so we have an idea of what is going on and what's in the process, not, just so we have that idea.
Mr. President.
Mr. Major.
And I'll address this with the chair of the committee as well and all of council, obviously, but I think that's a great idea. And that I think that's something that happened in the past as well. If I'm not mistaken, that past directors actually did come to city council meetings or committee meetings and address council and give updates. So whether that's a semi-annual basis or a quarterly basis,
Yeah, whatever makes sense.
to me, I think that's a great idea. I know they have the investor meetings once every, every quarter, every other month, whatever the schedule is and whatever it's going to be in the future. But that has been a thing in the past. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody that's up here, but that was a regular thing at one time. So I'd like to see that incorporated. I'd hope that the board would be okay with that. And I think that could be something we should maybe incorporate into this. I think that would be pretty easy.
Thank you, Mr. Major.
Mr. President, if I
Salendi, Are
may,
you finished? You finished?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay,
Go ahead,
thank you.
Mr.
Mr. Horniak.
I was going to say is, we did have Summer here when she was in that role, I think on 2 different occasions, and I think we did it twice a year. And I think Alec, I think we did the first one and we got hot into a potential project, which kind of made that a little difficult because there's only so much information you can share. But I agree, and certainly I'll work with a new director coming in, and we'll make sure that we will do it as an economic development committee meeting, and have them come in to do an update for everybody on council and with the administration as well.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Mr. Major.
Pardon the interruption. If it's okay with everybody, and make sure everybody's, and the OEDF's okay with it, we'll add that language into this for the next, if this gets moved on to the next, city council meeting. We'll make that change to this
Thank you.
contract and then.
Thank you. If there aren't any more questions.
Mr. President.
Mr. Drake.
All right, just a few things to clarify. I remember about 3 years ago, I gave Mrs. Gregory a call about attending a meeting because I was trying to learn up on that and the Eastern Chamber. I was there the other day. And she said she was going to be there a short time, and 3 years later, she's still here. So that's good to know somebody's taking Rome over it. And then the other question I have, I remember talking, I think it was to you, Mayor, about, they get $100,000, and I had brought up, it just seems like a lot of the people that have had that job, are kind of right out of college, maybe younger, and it might not be true for all of them. But I remember mentioning something about health insurance. And at that time, I believe you said, no, right now, who's ever going to take that job, they're good with whatever they're getting. So I'm just curious. I see where it's listed here as compensation, tax, and health insurance. So I don't know if that's changed. Do they get health insurance, or, because you know how it is. I mean,
Ms.
nobody wants-
First Ms. Gregory.
address that.
Or-
Can I first address it? And
Mr.
then
Mayor.
Mary can add to that too, is we've had different arrangements across of what we had to do to secure employment to the director of the choice. So it may come out as if the city employs a person and supplies them to the foundation, or that they're just hired by the foundation, because to cover on our health insurance, they have to be somewhat related to the city.
Mhm.
So we have exercised both options, depending on what it took to secure that actual director. So depending on what is the outcome of their interviewing process may determine how the person is employed. And one possibility would be for hospitalization, which sometimes gives us a little better chance of longevity versus the alternative. What we've seen is not only did our directors do well, several of them, they did quite well, and they got offered much better positions. So we lost about 6 directors that way. And so it tended to be a good opportunity for people to have the job and get recognized for someone else to snatch them up. And that's what happens. I guess the only other alternative was a lot higher pay scale, which it didn't seem to be practical either. So we're fooling ourselves if we think we're going to get someone that's there for 10 years. It's just reality. That isn't going to, the reality is that isn't going to happen. So when we find what we believe will be a very good candidate, then the negotiation starts as how the employment happens. And it may be one of those 2 ways. You know, some of the people, the insurance, like to most people, is very important. Some of the people already have it by some other means. So we don't know what that'll be until a person is selected.
Thank
And
you, Mayor.
then we'll negotiate is the best we can to come up to solidify it.
Ms. Gregory, did you have anything to add? Thank you very much. Okay,
Mr. Chair, I have
Yes.
one more thing. I'm sorry.
nope, thank you,
I'm
Mr.
only
Drake.
taking up about 3 minutes. Just to go back on what Mr. Horniak said earlier, I think it was good, the last meeting we had here. I knew some of the people, some I didn't, but I could tell by, I just had a good feeling that everybody was hunky-dory with everything and this and that. So I thought it was, you know, that meant a lot, I think, to a lot of us. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Council, any other questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 2024 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move to move item 24 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenzak. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Wallenzak to move item 2024 or 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 024 or 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. With all of the items on the agenda being considered, we will now move to the mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really don't have any report of anything happenings that I wish to speak about, but I am pleased with how we proceeded with this Economic Development Foundation agreement, because it got a little spirited at times, and I do know that our industrial prospects do look at everything that goes on, and they want to see that we are really conducting ourselves at a high level. And I think that was displayed tonight, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Major.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Major. Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Paul Roman.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Horniak.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Nothing from my standing committee, but just a statement on some of what was brought out. And Joel, I was going to bring this up from your update this week that came out regarding the new Bill 56. And I'll say the reallocation of local portions of that excise tax on dispensaries. I would think we want to follow that. And if that is the case, we may want to reopen or revisit our position on dispensaries within the city of Oregon. So I would think as soon as that passes and meets its window for enactment, I would think somewhere in that window, we would want to revisit that just to have that conversation of if we want to continue to proceed the same way we legislated last year, or if we would want to change that. So I just would say if that does pass, I for one would like to revisit that conversation. And that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
just for the record, I would totally agree with that, because if we knew that then, I think the outcome would have been a whole lot different. There's no value.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Pauloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to add to what Mr. Horniak just said, it's going to probably be the only state in the United States that does that, because everybody else pays their municipalities. But I agree, we really need to look into it if the municipalities are not going to be getting any of that. So other than that, I have no report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing for my standing committee, but I will piggyback on everybody and say, I agree. It started years ago with them reducing and taking away local government funds, and it continues. So if there's no benefit, then we definitely need to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck. Mrs. Ackerman.
Look at us agreeing. I was like, yes and amen, and I agree. When I saw that in the OML update, the first thought was, can we do a moratorium? Like until we, know? Or do we have enough are there applicants? I don't know.
Mr.
I don't know.
Major.
I thought maybe he was asking Ms. Purpura.
No.
Same.
Mr.
Do you
Major.
want to make a comment about moratoriums?
Yeah.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Sackerman. One, we had one, and then now, but you could enact another one based on this new information. So this is new information. It could be something that we will continue to track it. That's why I mentioned it the way I did, is that, hey, look, if this changes, does this change everybody's opinion about the dynamics of what dispensaries offer? And I think the answer to that is yes. Changes people's opinions.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you,
yes.
Mr. Major.
I also wanted to say thank you, everybody, for listening to my really sad first committee meeting. As far as, I have to remind myself that I'm more passionate about some things and other people are more passionate about other things. And, but thank you for bearing my clumsy approach at that meeting. I did want to ask, because it came up at the Chamber State of the Cities, what was that called? The State of the Community? Yeah. Report that the mayor said the date of Boomfest, proposed date of Boomfest for this year, and I didn't catch it. Was it July 26th? And then have you set that in stone for any particular reason other than you believe it to be cheaper?
No. Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
well, there's a lot of things that I take into consideration. And many of them are, other events are taking place around there. You're right, we did get a better value. We may not be using fireworks this year, but might be using a drone show, because at a location, we don't have the blast zone radius with the buildings going up, and the drone shows are pretty cool. They were pretty expensive, but the more time they're out, they get a little more affordable. So there's another thing. There's a big event that goes on just midway up in Michigan by the Detroit area, the second week after the 4th of July, that ties up a lot of equipment and makes the sound and light crew very strapped thin. Availability for artists is better that third week, because I've checked on ones that I deal with, and some are dark at that time. And so with other events going on, competing with other things, that seemed to be the best. We did, remember, we call it our 4th of July, but when, I first created that, there was a bunch of events that we had going on in the city, which none of them had much attendance to, and eliminated those and created one event. So so 4th of July is one of the events that's celebrated there, as well as Oregon Day, as well as, when we had Oregon Fest, which seemed to fizzle out. It's kind of incorporated all in that day, one expense, even though you see what newcomers come in and see a big number that is spent, it's actually less than we were spending on a whole bunch of events that took place during the year. Some people, find that hard to believe, but you'd be amazed at the money that was going out. So as much as it looks like that we're spending, it's less than went out here in prior years. The ability, once again, to switch from fireworks to a drone show may get us people to contribute better, because some were just against fireworks. Some of our big corporate investors didn't want to invest in a fireworks, so they were anti-fireworks. So lo and behold, one of the other things right around 4th of July, we are still slightly in the mayfly season. In early years when we had it, the mayflies moved in. It's a horrible combination, a whole bunch of lights and mayflies. The artists love it. It's just a horrible thing. So a lot of thought is taking place. I try to run everything over in my mind as much as possible, and I'm starting to get good at it. And so that's why adding that other week just helped in the lights, sound, and stage ability. That was the best for us.
Are
Thank-
you a
thank you,
committee
Mayor.
of one, Mr. Mayor?
A what?
Are you a committee of one, or who is on your committee to determine this date and when we're celebrating
Just
our
one.
4th of July?
Just one.
Just
me.
you?
Yeah.
I
I know
thought
you
we
love
had
that.
discussed having a committee
Huh?
to
That doesn't
form
work.
our city celebration.
I can tell you that doesn't work.
Thank
But
you,
I
Mr. Mayor.
appreciate your
Ms.
offer.
Ackerman? Anything further?
Next year, when we're celebrating, the state of Ohio celebrating, what is it, the sesquas? I won't say it right, the 250, yeah. So, I mean, I think we should key on being, actually celebrating July 4th on July 4th, maybe, when it's such a big event like that. So maybe keep that in mind if you're in office.
I will, I won't. It'd be tough to change to that. Remember, you'll be competing with everybody around that'll have celebrations then. And this gives people the latitude to go to maybe a big one in Toledo or somewhere around here and still have another one to go to. When you're competing against a bigger entity, it's real tough to do. And what I like to do is see the faces on the people that are there. And we had over 10,000 people at Dunn's to celebrate that last year, with another surrounding probably 3,000 people. And everyone I seen had smiles on their face, so they do enjoy it. And the timing isn't as important as the event, and that everybody has as many people as possible have a good time. And I really don't want to compete with a bunch of other events that are going on, because we do enjoy featuring the city of Oregon and letting people to come to see what we have to offer. And it's really a success, I think, at doing that. And people look forward to it. People call and ask when it's going to be, because they change their vacation time and when they're going on vacation, so they don't miss it. So I try to cover every base, and I don't do it what's the best for me. It's what I believe is the best for the most people to be able to attend and have a good time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor, I think patriots would object to leaving 4th of July in the dust. The patriots, people that care that the 4th of July Independence
There's
Day is
plenty of
actually
places-
celebrated within.
And there's plenty of
reasonable
places they can go
amount
to
of time.
celebrate, because most people have it that day. We'll be the exception to the rule.
So you're gonna change it? If it's a drone thing and there's no fireworks, will it be a boom?
No, I still call it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Salander?
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing from my standing committee, just a couple things. Maybe Buzz Fest from the propellers. Just playing with you. So I did want to just, sorry, I was a little bit late coming into your meeting today. I actually got an opportunity to speak to the Boy Scouts, a pack, I guess, out there at Star Elementary tonight. So I wanted to thank them for the opportunity to do that. They were learning about government, so that was a lot of fun. Some great kids out there. Secondly, I had been putting out the in the know updates out there, so I'm glad the city has taken that up. As long as people are getting the information and information is getting out there and they're knowing as much as we are, I think that's a win for everybody. So thank you for Joel or whoever put that out there. Thank you. I'm glad to see that starting. Thirdly, I did want to mention, I'm glad actually Mr. Mayor brought up Oregon Fest because I know there were a lot of people that were kind of sad to see it fizzle. And I actually had a business owner reach out to me, one of our local business owners, interested in trying to get that back up and running again. So we have met with Oregon Growth in regards to that. We're going to be looking at meeting with Joel and also Mr. Borton to kind of coordinate some things. So we're hoping to keep it still in the month of May. I don't want to say a date yet because I don't want to say 100%, but we're still shooting to try to get in there. So it probably not as big as before at this point, but at least to be able to have, we're not going to have 10,000 people. So, but if we have a good showing, that'd be great. I know people do enjoy it. Thirdly, I just want to mention the meeting last week also. I think regardless of all the controversy and articles and everything else that had been out and about, I think last week having that meeting was a big plus for ourselves as council, myself as being newer on council, and as well as the citizens. I think there's been a big question, a big conversation, a big uncertainty about what exactly OEDF is and what they do and who's part of it. So above it all, above and everything, I think it was actually very beneficial for all of us. So thank you, Ms. Gregory, for that and all the business owners that came out, because like I said before, I know it's all on their own time too. So it's very much appreciated and it was nice to see. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandlin. Mr. Drake.
No report from my standing committee. I just want to echo what I said 2 weeks ago, February 3rd. We're going to have
February 10th.
Okay, I'm sorry. On the 10th, I'm sorry. We're going to have a meeting regarding drainage roads and bridges, which grass mowing falls under. Basically, the gist of it, from what I've heard from the administration, mainly is, say from Lollendorf to the west, or I'm sorry, Lollendorf to the east, mowing along the right of ways. So if you know anybody, or it doesn't matter where they live, as long as they're from Oregon, if they want to come and speak on it, fine. So that meeting will be at 6 p.m., hour before the regular meeting. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. And I have nothing from my standing committee. And if there is no further business before council, I will seek a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Was that Ms. Paula? Thank you. Council, any objections? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.